Hello, everyone. Today we are very privileged to have Professor Jay Bai with us, who will be delivering a guest lecture on an important topic, a very relevant topic for both healthcare and economics. Why pharmaceutical drugs are more expensive in the US than in Europe. But first, let me introduce our guest speaker. Dr. Bai is professor of accounting at Johns Hopkins Carey Business School and also professor of health policy and management at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Professor Bai is a renowned expert on healthcare accounting, finance, and policy. She has a long list of publications, including publications in very top academic journals, New England Journal of Medicine, JAMA, Health Affairs. She testified before the House of Representatives Ways and Means Committee. She writes regularly on healthcare policy issues on Forbes. She has also written on for the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post. She's really an outstanding scholar and a great colleague and friend, if I may add. She's also a great instructor. In fact, Professor Bai received the Johns Hopkins Alumni Association's Excellence in Teaching Award. Thank you for being part of this course, G. So today's topic is why pharmaceutical drugs cost more in the US than in Europe. This subject is critical, not just for scholars and healthcare professionals and policymakers, but also for patients and consumers who sort of navigate the complexity of healthcare systems. The disparity in drug pricing between the US and Europe has implications for access to healthcare, for insurance policies, and for the overall well-being of patients and customers. So we look forward to learning from you about the factors that contribute to this discrepancy. You have the floor. Thanks again for being part of our course.
Thank you so much, Professor Macis. It's a huge honor, and I'll consider myself a close friend to you, and this is a true pleasure to be here. So let me start by saying, echo Professor Macis' point that this is a very important topic. Think about when we approach to late age, right? We have a weak body. At that time, we're like, we need the drug to help us. Because if we go to a hospital, usually that's because our body already collapsed to some extent, right? So drug really provide hope to many people. Therefore, access and pricing issues are super important to everybody, every human being on earth. So let me start I have a slide to share. So it's a relatively straightforward presentation. So we're gonna start first with the approval agency. So in Europe and the US, in order for a drug to be available on the market, we have to go through approval process, right? In Europe, the European Medicines Agency, EMEA, is in control of the process. In the US, it's FDA, Federal Drug and Food and Drug Administration. So these two agencies are very similar, but remember, FDA is in control of one country, and the staff makes all decisions. But in EMEA, the decision is made from input of all the European countries in a pretty structured form. And then the decision, once made, has applicability across Europe. However, each individual country will decide coverage policy based on their own budgetary constraint, right? Let's say a drug is approved by EMEA, does not mean you as a citizen in Europe will have access because your country might not cover it. Okay, so that's a regulatory process between the two countries. So now let's first look at the access to EMEA approved drugs. So here is a statistic from 2023. So we can see here that in Germany, 88% of the EMA approved drugs are available. And then we have many countries, but I'm just, this is a snapshot. In Spain, it's only 58%, and you have other countries even lower. Then why is that? That's because each individual country has its own budgetary constraint, right? So Germany, hopefully everybody agrees, it has the highest access to approved drugs. Now let's compare Germany with US. But keep in mind, Germany is only the top country in the US, in Europe, right? There are other countries even have less access than Germany. So this is the most recent study, to my knowledge, that compare availability of drugs between US and Germany. By the way, we're talking about the branded drugs. We're not talking about generic drugs, right? These drugs are new drugs, brand name drugs, very recent developed, and therefore having patents. So they look at the between 2004 and 2018. So there are about 600 medicines approved in the US and Germany. So the universe is this pool of drugs approved in both countries. So 92% of them were available in the US, and then 80% were available in Germany. So there's a gap showing US has 12% more drugs available than in Germany. And probably other countries in Europe have less access. And then the median approval time in Germany was extended by 4 months. So the conclusion is pretty straightforward. So fewer medicine available in Germany than US, and then they enter market at a later time in Germany than US. Okay, so if you're a patient in Europe that you need this new medicine, you have a slightly lower chance to access the drug, and also a little bit later time. So that's what the study found. Then we have to look at the policy first. Okay, I'm going to first talk about policy at the government level and talk about at the private level. Because if every part of the world have exactly same drug policy, right, we will not see any difference, right? So let's first look at how government plays a role in the difference of drug access. So this is a paper we published with my colleagues in Hopkins, publishing annual review of public health in 2020. So we reviewed the drug approval and the pricing policies in developed countries as well as developing countries. And then, by the way, the things really did not change much for the past 3 or 4 years. So let's look at it here. The US rely primarily on market force to determine price for drugs, while other industrialized countries use a variety of approaches to determine drug price. This really is the key. In the US, relatively speaking, we're depending on the market to decide drug price, but in other countries, some kind of price control, government price setting, price control, to have a more influence on pricing. So again, we're talking about the branded drugs, right? So branded, we hopefully everybody already understand the patent give drug market exclusivity, but then within the market exclusivity, that period, the US have a very different approach than in Europe. So what do we do in US? So US, we're saying the insured patient pay a percentage of list price, and then there's a cost sharing, and then we depend on pharmacy benefit managers to negotiate the price with drug company. So this is how it works. Drug company will set the price by itself. The government has no say over how the drug company set the price, at least before the IRA, Inflation Reduction Act. Okay, so if I am only giving, okay, I make the drug that nobody else makes in this therapeutic area, guess what? I'm going to have a very high, very expensive price, and nobody can do anything about it because there's no government price setting, right? But if I'm not the only game in town, let's say I'm the third entrant to that, let's say lung cancer area, and there are already 2 incumbent players have pretty similar products. Mine might be incrementally better. Then guess what? I have to compete, right? I'm facing competitors. At that time, the pharmacy benefit manager comes to play. This PBM, pharmacy benefit manager, come to me saying, look, G, if you want your drug to have a broad access, then you need to give me rebate. Give me rebate, and I will put you on my formulary at a relatively favorable position. So people are more likely to buy your drug. Then I'm like, okay, I have a high list price, but I'm going to give a huge rebate, almost like a bribe to PBM, saying, put me on a good position so I can have access to patients. So that's how it works. But hopefully you can see that more competition in my therapeutic area more likely I'm offering a high rebate to PBM to secure a good position on the formulary, right? So that's a key of US mechanism, using PBM, using market competition to control drug price. However, if you're the only game in town, guess what? There's nothing, right? Nobody can do anything about it. You are not gonna give anyone rebate because I'm the only one. But the things are very different in Europe. So in Europe, within this exclusivity area, they employ various forms of rate setting and price regulation, okay, such as external reference pricing. Look at other countries, say Japan, how much do they do? Then we're gonna reference it. And we're therapeutical evaluation or health technology assessment saying, okay, if this drug can extend the life by 2 years, then this is how much we're willing to pay. This is all decision made by the government. So this is really the difference between US and Europe. And I think that's the main reason for the price gap. So here's just a more detailed picture of the price control mechanism in selected European countries. So let's look at UK. UK, they primarily depend on added value innovation, the potential added therapeutical value informs the health technology assessment. So it's a government agency go there and say, we're gonna decide if this drug's worth it or not. You know, we'll have an assessment of the like cost benefit, similar to cost benefit analysis. So indirect price control, figuring out what the government is willing to pay. So you can see there's a government, right, sitting in between the drug company and the price. Drug company cannot just decide their price. So in Australia, this is not Europe, but it's pretty similar to what UK does. And then they set a maximum reimbursement for generics. And in Germany, they primarily use the therapeutical reference pricing and also price negotiation for innovative drugs. So negotiation between drug company and the government. In France, there negotiation and then added value innovation. So again, government determine how much the value added, then going through a pretty complicated process to decide the price. But the bottom line is, guess what? Through all this kind of pricing, negotiation, determination, assessment, the price just lower in Europe for the same drug, for the same brand name, innovative drug within the market exclusivity period. That's for the government side. Now let's move on to the private sector. So the private sector, these drug companies, the biotech firms, they decide where they put their money, right? So in the past 25 years, let's look at that. 25 years ago, the data shows 50% of new treatment came from Europe. So right now, about 20%. So there's a drop, right, in the percentage of new drugs coming from Europe. So according to the words of the director of this trade association of pharmaceutical companies, so saying this is a problem, threat to employment and competitiveness in Europe. So the reason for this sentiment is this R&D sector is not super big, but still it supports 2.5 million people in Europe. It's not direct, right? It directly employs about 840,000 people, but the whole industry supports about 2.5 million jobs, and it's worth 43 billion euros each year. So it's a reasonably large sector, helps the economy, helps employment, but more importantly, generates new products, right? New drug products that can help improve people's health status. So that's R&D gap we have noticed in 25 years. There's some change. So why did the money move from Europe to the US gradually in the past 25 years? Well, that's because in US, the money's there, right? Follow the money, right? You think about yourself. If you are the drug manufacturers, your decision to where you're located, how you launch your first drug, all these decisions are not random, right? It's purely strategic. You want to maximize your revenue. So here's the US picture. In US in 2022, government funding, NIH, including all the agencies under NIH, about $46 billion. But the private funding is about $158 billion. So it's four times higher, right? 3 or 4 times higher than the federal funding. So within the private funding, so this pie chart is private funding, you have venture capital, you have IPO, you have follow-on, the additional venture money into an existing established venture, and then licensing upfront, you just license your things and get the money. And then pharmaceutical R&D. These are large pharmaceutical companies. They buy the product from venture or bio firm, and they develop, going through the pipeline, eventually commercialize. So this is more than half, right? The blue things, the top 10 pharma R&D, that's more than half of the private funding. So that's the ecosystem. A lot of money, right, is in the US. There's a huge, so you look at, the SP 500, look at the NASDAQ. That is not the whole picture, because there's a lot of venture money, right? Angel investors behind the scenes, so pushing up this very interesting ecosystem for R&D, which is less vibrant in Europe. So let me just have a quick summary of what's going on, at least in my opinion. So we talk about brand name drug price control, price setting or assessment, etc. We're just simply saying government intervention in the pricing mechanism. I would say Europe is more than US, right? So because of that, or at least primarily because of that, private investment intensity is higher than US. We should not just look at the total dollar amount. Of course, US should be higher because US is bigger economy, but also some intensity, some excitement, all right? That is really heavier in the US. Why? Because the US has more elasticity. Like if you put in money, right, you can get money back. If I'm the only game in town, as I mentioned earlier, like nobody's controlling my price. Nobody's saying this is the reference pricing you must follow, right? This is a health assessment, you must comply. Nobody's going to tell me that. Therefore, as a private investor, I'm going to do more in the United States. Therefore, we have more quicker or broader access to brand name drugs in the US, assuming you have enormous money, all right? Remember, the price is higher in the US, but we're saying, assuming the money is not an issue, then the brand name drug access is higher in US than in Europe. However, don't forget, even considering higher access in the US, assuming remember, Medicaid program covers low-income individuals in the US are required to cover all drugs, although they have red tapes, but basically the government's making some measures to make sure if you need the drug, there are ways, right, to access the drug to some extent. Given that the US has better drug access, guess what? US people's health status, well-being in many metrics, we're actually lagging behind Europe. Therefore, I think when we talk about patient well-being and the drug access, we also have to think about social determinant of health, different other issues. But overall, I think this is a big picture. How we think about the price control, how we think about the drug affordability, and then eventually health status. That's really my 2 cents. Thank you so much, Professor Macis.
This was really, really wonderful. Thank you very much for a super informative lecture. And so you brought up a lot of topics. And by the way, I will make available all of the materials that you referenced. Thank you for that too. I will make available all of the materials on the course website, so students can take a look at all of the papers that you cited. So your discussion was really, really insightful, because you made it very clear that this is a complex topic with trade-offs involved at the societal level, like with sort of big decisions that involve trade-offs, and where nothing is really black and white, or where there are really complicated issues to take into account. I have a couple of questions. I don't want to take up too much of your time. You've been very generous already, but I have a couple of questions. You mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act in your presentation. Could you say a few things about what it did in the context of, I know it did a lot of things, but in the context of drug prices in the US?
Yeah, thank you so much. So I would say 2 things. There are many things, as Professor Macis said, but I will just pick up 2 things that's relatively relevant. So first one is starting the precedent of government negotiating drug price. So government will pick like 10 drugs. There are a lot of criteria. Like they have been in the market for a while. There are some competing drugs, but then they still have a high price, etc. And they have to have a high spending. Then the HHS, which is the Department of Health Human Services in the US, will go there negotiating with drug company to get a better deal. Right, that's the very first time U.S. government steps in directly in the negotiating process. Remember, before it's always like PBM, right, pharmacy benefit manager go there to negotiate. That's the first difference. And then, it's not just this one year, because next year they will have 10 more drugs. The following year, so this is ongoing process. The second issue is about this inflation rebate or inflation penalty, saying if the drugs are increasing their price higher than inflation, there has to be some rebate coming to the government. We're not talking about the whole market, it's about Medicare, Medicaid space, specifically for IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, it's about Medicare space. So if you increase the price, you have to get the rebate back according to the Medicare market. So overall, it's a more intervention, right, from government in the pricing world.
Thanks. Very, very interesting. And a second question that I had for those students who might not be super familiar with the pharmacy, with the PBMs. This is like something that only exists in the US, right? And so why is that? Like, how did these PBMs came to be, and why is their role so important in the US?
Yeah, thank you so much. Right, this PBM is a very unique phenomenon, only existing in US. Europe does not need it because the government already set the price. In Japan, Australia also, there's no need for them. But in the US, there's a fundamental reason, like legal reason why they exist. It's just a safe harbor, and they kick back. We're gonna leave that aside. But let's assuming that they are allowed to exist by Congress, then their job is to go there to knock a big gap between gross price and net price. So the drug company will set the least price. That's just upfront have gross price. Then the PBM will go there, knock a chunk of the least price to achieve a net price. The net price is what the insurance companies actually pay to get the drug. So you might ask, where did the gap go? It comes as a rebate. The rebate, after each quarter, the drug manufacturers will give a rebate, literally a check, to PBM, and PBM will either give all or majority of it to the plan sponsor. The plan sponsor, like self-employed, self-insured employers or Medicare, those plan sponsors give the money to them, and then the money we use to reduce premium for every enrollee. But then the problem is when the patients actually go get the drug, the patient will pay copay, right? Co-insurance. The co-insurance or copay is in series all based on the list price. So if your list price high, as a patient, I pay a high percentage. But then even if you have a huge rebate, that does not affect my copay co-insurance, right? Because that is based on list price. So that creates a problem, hurting patient interest. And that's, in my opinion, is the root cause for all the debate regarding the PBM.
Thank you. That's super, super interesting. A question more like where, different people have different views, right? But is there anything that you think, based on your research or your personal views, that the US could borrow from the experience of some European countries that might lead to lower drug prices here, while keeping alive the incentive to innovate and produce new drugs? Or do you think that the US has chosen the right model for us, for the country? How do you view this?
Thank you, Professor.
I'm curious.
This is a great question, and it's very controversial, right? For me, my biggest issue with government intervention is that I don't know who's making the decision, right? If you go to the Department of Health and Human Services, this is a bunch of experts or bureaucrats. do they really know more than the collective wisdom of the market? I doubt it, right? That's number one. We should not think government consists of the people with superior knowledge, superior experience, perfect knowledge. That's not true. This is just normal people and a group of people. The second issue is this process is all, if we do price control, it's all behind the scene, right? Public has really little knowledge unless we go full scale as Europe, right? We have this very clear assessment process, so make it hard for companies to capture the process, make it hard for them to game. So I think either we want to let the market work, or we want to use the Europe way, right? But we don't want to have some kind of government-private partnership. Then that will just become a ground for crony capitalism. Yeah.
Thanks. It's very, very interesting perspective. Final question. A final question again to continue to add something to the additional elements to the discussion. And so in markets, right, the beauty of markets is that competition produces an incentive to innovate, but also to innovate while keeping prices low. So if we look at the US, okay, innovation is taking place, but prices are not low. So is there a problem of competition? Like, is there too much market power that maybe pharmaceutical companies have? Is from your point of view, can we do more to increase competition in the US to produce both innovation and lower prices?
100%. I think the problem is FDA. FDA is actually a bottleneck. If you look at the COVID-19 at-home test, which is not a brand name drug, but I want to use that analogy. In Europe, it's only €1 per test. Why? Because Europe has dozens of approved supplier of at-home tests, but the US is $13 per test at the beginning. Now it's getting $6 or $7 simply because FDA opened the door. Because at the beginning, only three suppliers are allowed to make those tests in the US.
I remember that.
Right?
I remember those days.
And then guess what? These three manufacturers are all good friends of the people in FDA, like controlling the decision. So when we look at the US competition, we should not assume we have perfect competition. We have a very much government moderated competition. And in many cases, the competition also is contaminated by special interests, some internal dealings that we as public do not really understand, are not aware. So in order for the market to work, we have to have an open, transparent, even playground. Otherwise, we become crony capitalism. And in my opinion, that's the worst of worst, because government and private, they're in the name of competition. Actually, they're just channeling money from taxpayers, from hardworking Americans to the pockets of the drug manufacturers who have great political access and connection.
Professor Bai, what a privilege this has been. Thank you so much for providing a very enlightening lecture and lots of food for thought for me and for our students. I'm very, very grateful. Thank you.
It's my honor. Thank you so much, Professor Macis. I really appreciate your interest and giving me this huge opportunity. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.